My name is Cora Monroe, and for as long as I can remember, my life has been tied to the scent of damp earth and the patient rhythm of the seasons. My grandfather, Silas, raised me from the age of 10, after a quiet stretch of highway in the rain took my parents and left a void in the world only he knew how to fill. He wasn't a man of grand pronouncements or easy sentiment. His love was a language spoken in freshly turned soil, in the careful way he'd prune his rose bushes, and in the sturdy silence we shared on the porch swing, watching the sun bleed across the Oakhaven sky. He taught me that everything of value takes time to grow. We lived in his old timber frame house on the edge of town, a place that seemed to breathe with the memories of generations. Our days were measured not by clocks, but by the needs of the garden and the quiet hum of his life's work, a small, beloved bookstore in the heart of town called The Gilded Page. It was there, among the scent of aging paper and leather binding, that I learned about worlds beyond our own, and it was in his garden that I learned how to tend to the world I was in. I met Ryan in my final year of university. He was magnetic, with a quick smile and an energy that felt like a vibrant contrast to my own quiet nature. He saw a future full of sharp angles and clean lines, of strategic investments and upward mobility. I saw a life of gentle curves and soft light, of deep roots and slow, steady growth. I thought our differences would complement each other, that his ambition would give my dream structure, and my steadiness would give his drive a place to rest. For 8 years, I believed we were building a life together, a partnership woven from 2 different threads into a single, strong tapestry. I was wrong. The threads were never woven together. One had simply been wrapped tightly around the other, constricting it so slowly I never noticed I was losing circulation. The call came on a Thursday morning, the kind with a low, gray sky that presses down on the world. It was from Mr. Gable, my grandfather's solicitor, a man whose voice was as dry and precise as the legal documents he spent his life drafting. "Mrs. Monroe," he began, his tone formal, but softened with an uncharacteristic gentleness. "I'm calling about your grandfather's last will and testament. The reading is, well, it's a formality at this point, but there are matters to discuss. Could you come to my office this afternoon? Say 2 o'clock. I sat on the edge of the bed we shared, the cool morning air raising goosebumps on my arms. Ryan was still asleep, a dark slash of hair across the crisp white pillowcase. Silas's funeral had been a week ago, a simple service under the ancient oak tree where he'd asked to be buried. The scent of rain-soaked earth from that day still lingered in my memory, a final, grounding farewell. "What's wrong, Cora?" Ryan murmured, rolling over. His voice was thick with sleep, but his eyes were alert. "It's Mr. Gable." "About Grandpa's will," I whispered, my stomach twisting. Something in the solicitor's voice had sounded a note of quiet urgency. A few hours later, I was sitting in a worn leather chair across from Mr. Gable's vast mahogany desk. The office smelled of beeswax and old paper, a scent that was intrinsically linked to my grandfather, who had spent countless hours in this very room managing the affairs of his modest life. Mr. Gable cleared his throat, adjusting his spectacles as he slid a thick, cream-colored envelope across the desk. "Cora," he said, foregoing the formal Mrs. Monroe for the first time in years. "Your grandfather was a very deliberate man. He made some significant changes to his will about a year ago. He was, I can assure you, of perfectly sound mind and resolute in his decisions." He opened a file and began to read in a low monotone, but the words seemed to fill the room, pushing out all the air. "To my beloved granddaughter, Cora May Monroe, in whom my heart has found its greatest joy and deepest pride, I bequeath my entire estate. This includes the family home and property at 14 Willow Creek Lane, the business and building of the Gilded Page, and all investment portfolios, liquid assets, and personal effects, with a total approximate value of $3.2 million. The number didn't register at first. It was an abstraction, a sound without meaning. I stared at him, my mind struggling to form a coherent thought. I don't understand. What about my cousins? Uncle Robert's children?" he always said. Mr. Gable shook his head softly. He was very specific, Cora. "It is all for you. There is also this." He pushed the cream-colored envelope closer. A personal letter. He insisted you read it before making any decisions. My hands trembled as I broke the wax seal, a small, perfect S impressed upon it. Silas's familiar, elegant script filled the page. My dearest Cora, if you are reading this, then I have finally gone to see what your grandmother has been tending in that great garden in the sky. Do not mourn me for long, my sweet girl. A life lived with you and it has been more than enough for any one man. I am leaving you everything, not as a burden, but as a set of tools. You have always been the one who understood the true value of things. When your cousins visited, their eyes would scan the shelves, calculating the worth of my first editions. You would sit with me on the porch and ask about the stories behind the books, about the people who had read them before us. They saw assets. You saw legacy. You have a gardener's heart, Cora. Patient, nurturing, and kind. But I worry that your soil is too forgiving. I have watched your husband, Ryan. I have seen the way his gaze sharpens when the talk turns to finances, the way he steers conversations towards my investments with a practiced, casual air. He is a man who measures the world in profit and loss, and I fear he sees you as his most valuable acquisition. Be careful with these tools I am leaving you, my dear. Not everyone who claims to want to help you build your garden has an interest in seeing it flourish for its own sake. Some only want to harvest the fruits for themselves. This inheritance is your freedom. Use it to build something beautiful, something that will last. And remember, my Cora, you owe no one a single leaf from your tree. Your worth was cultivated long before this money ever came to you. Never let anyone convince you otherwise. All my love, always, Grandpa Silas. Tears streamed down my face, blurring his beautiful words. I pressed the letter to my chest, the paper absorbing the warmth of my skin. He had seen it. He had seen the subtle shadows in my marriage that I had dismissed as mere differences in personality. The way Ryan's enthusiasm was always reserved for things that had a price tag. The way he'd subtly belittled my desire to work part-time at a local nursery, calling it a hobby that didn't contribute meaningfully to our financial goals. The drive home was a blur. The world outside my car window looked the same, but my perception of it had been irrevocably altered. It was like learning a new color and suddenly seeing it everywhere. The certified check from the estate's primary account sat in my purse, a tangible weight that felt both like a shield and a target. Ryan was in the kitchen when I walked in, his laptop open on the gleaming quartz countertop he had insisted was a necessary upgrade for resale value. He looked up, his smile bright and expectant. So, what did the old man leave you? I'm hoping for that collection of antique maps. Some of those could be worth a small fortune. I set my purse on the table, my movements slow and deliberate. I studied his face, the handsome features I had loved for so long, and saw for the first time the flicker of avarice in his eyes, the same look Silas had warned me about. He left me everything, Ryan, I said, my voice quiet but clear. The house, the bookstore, everything. The estate is valued at around $3.2 million. The sleek, stainless steel coffee mug in his hand slipped, crashing to the polished concrete floor. It didn't shatter. It dented with a loud, ugly clang. For a long moment, he just stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. Everything, he whispered, and the whisper was not one of shock, but of dawning, rapturous calculation. Cora, do you know what this means? He let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound of pure, unadulterated triumph. We're free. We can finally quit our jobs, start that tech consultancy I've been mapping out, buy that lake house. This changes everything. He used the word we, but his eyes were looking at a future I suddenly realized I had no part in. As he began to pace the kitchen, excitedly listing off investment strategies and tax shelters, his voice faded into a dull drone. All I could hear were my grandfather's words echoing in my heart. All I could see was the dented mug on the floor, a perfect metaphor for our marriage, something that looked modern and strong on the outside, but was hollow and easily damaged. Grandpa Silas's greatest gift wasn't the money. It was the clarity. It was a lens powerful enough to see through 8 years of carefully constructed illusion and show me the stark, lonely truth of the man I had married. The week that followed was like living in a house with a ghost. The ghost was the love I thought we'd had, and its presence made every room feel cold and unfamiliar. Ryan was a whirlwind of manic energy, printing out financial projections, making calls to wealth managers, and sketching out plans for a new life that felt entirely alien to me. He spoke constantly of our portfolio and our assets, but when I tried to interject, to say I needed time to breathe, to think, he would become soothingly patronizing. "Of course, honey. It's a lot to take in," he'd say, patting my hand. "That's why you have me. I'll handle the complicated stuff. You just focus on, well, whatever you need to focus on." I spent my days at my grandfather's house, the house that was now mine. I walked through the quiet rooms, running my hands over the worn furniture and breathing in the scent of lemon oil and old wood. I found refuge in the garden, pulling weeds with a ferocity that surprised me, my fingers digging into the cool, damp earth as if I could draw strength directly from it. In the evenings, I'd sit in Silas's study, surrounded by his books, and pore over the financial documents he'd left in meticulously organized files. He had not just left me money, he had left me a roadmap, a lifetime of careful, thoughtful stewardship. The text message arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, a jarring intrusion into the sanctuary of Silas's study. It was from Ryan. "Family dinner at Mom and Dad's on Sunday. 1 p.m. Be there." The tone was clipped imperative. It wasn't an invitation, it was a summons. Ryan's parents, Helen and Richard, were kind, simple people who had always treated me with warmth. A Sunday dinner at their cozy, slightly cluttered house should have felt like a comfort. But my instincts, long dormant, were now wide awake and screaming. I knew this wasn't about a pot roast and family bonding. Sunday dawned heavy and overcast. I spent the morning at the cemetery, laying a small bouquet of white roses from Silas's own garden on his grave. "He's making his move, Grandpa," I whispered to the cool stone. "I think I'm ready. I think you made me ready." When I pulled my modest sedan into the driveway of Ryan's childhood home, I saw it immediately. Tucked behind his father's pickup truck was a sleek, silver Lexus I'd never seen before. A chill traced its way down my spine. Ryan met me at the door, his smile a little too wide, his eyes a little too bright. "Cora." Perfect timing. "Come on in, everyone's waiting." The word everyone hung in the air. I stepped inside, and the familiar scent of Helen's baking was overlaid with something else, the faint, sterile smell of expensive cologne. The living room furniture had been rearranged. The comfortable, lived-in circle of armchairs had been pushed back to create a formal semicircle facing the coffee table, like a makeshift boardroom. Helen stood awkwardly by the kitchen doorway, wringing a dish towel in her hands, her usual welcoming smile replaced by a look of profound unease. Ryan's brother, Daniel, stood by the window, staring out at the gray sky, refusing to meet my eyes. And sitting on the sofa, as if they owned it, were two men in impeccably tailored suits. Their leather briefcases were open on the coffee table, fanning out a sheaf of intimidatingly official-looking documents. "Ryan, what's going on?" I asked, my voice low and steady, though my heart had begun to beat a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Cora, this is Mr. Finch and Mr. Thorne," Ryan said, his voice taking on a breezy, managerial tone that made my skin crawl. "They're top-tier estate planners." I thought, with everything being so overwhelming, they could help us get things in order, make sure we're optimizing the inheritance properly. The word "us" struck me like a physical blow. I looked from Ryan's falsely earnest face to the two lawyers, whose polite smiles didn't reach their cold, appraising eyes. This wasn't a family dinner. It was an ambush. "I don't recall asking for help," I said, my gaze sweeping the room. Helen flinched and disappeared into the kitchen. Daniel shifted his weight, his discomfort palpable. Mr. Finch, the older of the two, stood and extended a hand. His grip was firm and dry. "Mrs. Monroe, your husband has expressed his concern for your well-being. A sudden windfall of this magnitude can be a great shock. We're simply here to help you structure the assets in a way that provides maximum security and benefit for the both of you." His condescension was a whetstone, sharpening my resolve. "I see. We've drafted the preliminary paperwork to establish a joint marital trust," Mr. Thorne, the younger, more aggressive one, added, gesturing to the papers on the table. It's standard procedure for married couples. It ensures transparency, shared governance, and protects the estate from unnecessary tax liabilities. It's really the most sensible path forward. I stepped closer, my eyes scanning the top page. I didn't need to read the fine print. I could see the bold headings: transfer of assets, co-trustee agreement, liquidation authority. They wanted me to sign away my grandfather's legacy, to place it in a shared container where Ryan would have equal, if not primary, control. This is all very thorough, I said, my voice carefully neutral. I picked up a pen from the table, feeling the weight of it in my hand. Ryan's face relaxed into a triumphant smirk. He thought he had won. He thought the gentle, quiet Cora would buckle under the pressure of suits and legal jargon. He had forgotten who raised me. He had forgotten the man who taught me that the strongest trees have the deepest roots, and that you never, ever let anyone cut them out from under you. I looked at Ryan, at the hunger in his eyes. Then I looked at the two lawyers, the hired guns brought in to intimidate me. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face, a smile born of grief and anger and a sudden, exhilarating surge of power. You're absolutely right, Ryan, I said, and his own smile widened. This is far too important to handle without professional guidance. I set the pen down, not on the signature line, but next to the stack of papers. It's funny, I continued, my voice clear and ringing in the suddenly silent room. I was thinking the exact same thing. I turned toward the front door. That's why I brought someone too. The blood drained from Ryan's face. You? What? As if on cue, the doorbell rang. I walked over and opened it. Standing on the porch was a woman in her late 60s with a crisp, silver bob and eyes the color of a winter sky. She radiated an aura of calm, unshakable confidence. Beatrice, I said. Thank you for coming. Not at all, Cora, she said, stepping inside. Her sharp gaze swept the room, taking in the scene in a single, comprehensive glance: the rearranged furniture, the nervous in-laws, the two stunned lawyers, and Ryan, whose face had crumpled into a mask of disbelief and fury. She extended a hand, not to the men, but to me, giving my fingers a reassuring squeeze. Then she turned her attention to the room at large. Good afternoon, gentlemen, said Beatrice Shaw, the most respected and feared estate litigation attorney in the state. I'm Ms. Shaw, Cora's counsel. Now, whose trust documents are we looking at here? I do hope they're in order. I'd hate to think anyone was trying to take advantage of my client during her time of grief. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the sound of Helen dropping a pot in the kitchen. In that moment, watching the color drain from Ryan's face as Beatrice Shaw moved toward the coffee table with the predatory grace of a snow leopard, my mind didn't just focus on the present. It fractured, sending splinters of memory shooting backward through the 8 years of my marriage. The ambush in this living room wasn't an isolated event. It was the grand finale of a long, subtle campaign I had been too blind to see. My mind landed on our 5th anniversary. We were at a restaurant with starched white tablecloths and hushed lighting. I had just been offered a full-time position as head horticulturist at the Oakhaven Botanical Gardens, a dream job I'd worked toward for years. When I told Ryan, beaming with pride, his first response wasn't a congratulations. That's fantastic, he'd said, already doing calculations on a napkin. The salary bump will be significant. We can finally accelerate the timeline for the down payment on a bigger house. I'll run the numbers tonight. He hadn't asked if I was happy. He hadn't celebrated my achievement. He had immediately converted my joy into a number on a spreadsheet, another asset to be leveraged for our goals that I now realized had always been his. I'd felt a prickle of disappointment at the time, but I'd quickly buried it, telling myself he was just being practical, that he was our family's designated planner. Beatrice's voice, sharp and precise, pulled me back to the present. Mr. Finch, this clause regarding immediate liquidity of tangible assets is unusually aggressive. Could you explain the legal necessity for such a provision? As the two lawyers began to stammer, my mind drifted again. This time to the car. 2 years ago, I'd come home from work to find a brand new, graphite gray SUV in our driveway. Ryan was leaning against it, grinning. Surprise! I traded in your old sedan. This is much safer, all-wheel drive, better for the winters. Ryan, we can't afford this. I'd gasped, my heart sinking as I saw the sticker price through the window. Don't worry, I got a great deal on the lease, he'd said smoothly. And I had to put it in your name, babe, your credit score is pristine. It actually lowered the monthly payment. He'd framed it as a gift, a gesture of his care for my safety. But it was a unilateral decision that yoked me to a significant financial obligation without my consent. When I'd tried to protest further, he'd looked wounded. I thought you'd be happy. Don't you trust me to make good decisions for us? That question, don't you trust me, had been his ultimate weapon. He'd wielded it with surgical precision any time I questioned a purchase, an investment, or a withdrawal from our savings. He had conditioned me to believe that financial prudence was a form of distrust, that asking for transparency was an attack on our marriage. The most painful memory, however, was the one involving Grandpa Silas. A year before he passed, he'd given us a check for $10,000. For the bookstore, Cora, he'd said, pressing it into my hand. The roof has a leak and the wiring is ancient. Use this to make it safe. It's an investment in its future. I had given the check to Ryan to deposit, trusting him to call the contractors we'd gotten estimates from. A month later, when I asked for an update, he'd been evasive. Finally, he admitted the truth over dinner. I found a better use for the capital company. A friend of mine is launching a tech startup. It's a ground floor opportunity. I invested the $10,000. The potential return is tenfold what we'd get from fixing up that old place. But Ryan, that wasn't your money to invest. It was for the bookstore. Grandpa gave it to us for a specific purpose. It's our money now, Cora. And I'm making it work for us. You have to stop being so sentimental about that dusty old shop. It's a depreciating asset. This is about building a real future. The startup had folded within 6 months, taking Silas's $10,000 with it. The roof of the Gilded Page continued to leak, a slow, steady drip that felt like a weeping wound in the heart of my grandfather's legacy. The shame I'd felt was so profound I could never bring myself to tell Silas what had happened. But he knew. I'd seen it in his eyes the last time he'd visited the store, his gaze lingering on the water stains spreading across the ceiling tiles. He didn't say a word, but his quiet disappointment was worse than any angry lecture. Mrs. Monroe? Beatrice's calm voice was an anchor in the storm of my memories. I looked at her and she gave me a small, encouraging nod. It was time. The carefully constructed facade of the quiet, agreeable wife crumbled, and in its place stood Silas's granddaughter. I reached into the leather tote bag I'd brought, the one Ryan had once called frumpy, and pulled out a thick, tabbed binder. I placed it on the coffee table with a solid, definitive thud that made everyone in the room jump. Actually, Beatrice, I said, my voice resonating with a strength I hadn't known I possessed. Before we discuss their documents, I think it's important for everyone to review some of mine. Ryan stared at the binder as if it were a venomous snake. He'd seen me working on it in Silas's study, and I'd told him it was just organizing Grandpa's old papers. Beatrice opened the binder. The first tab was labeled Unauthorized Transactions. This, I said, my voice level, is a full accounting of the last 5 years of our joint finances. It includes the SUV leased in my name without my final consent, the $10,000 for the bookstore that was misappropriated for a failed speculative investment, and dozens of smaller transactions for high-risk stocks, all made from our joint savings account without my knowledge. Ryan's face went from white to a blotchy red. We discussed all of those things. You're twisting everything. Am I? I flipped to the next tab, labeled Correspondence. I pulled out a printed email. This is an email from you to your friend, Alex, from 6 months ago. The subject line is The Old Man's Nest Egg. In it, you speculate on my grandfather's health and outline a strategy for managing Cora's emotional attachment to the assets once he passed. You refer to his home as a prime redevelopment opportunity. A choked sound came from Ryan's brother, Daniel. He finally looked at me, his face a mixture of horror and shame. That's, that's not what it looks like, Ryan stammered, his eyes darting between his lawyers, who now looked deeply uncomfortable, and his brother, who looked sickened. Then perhaps this will provide more context, I said, pulling out my phone. I've found that voice memos can be so clarifying, haven't you, Ryan? I pressed play. Ryan's own voice filled the silent room, a whispered recording he'd made 2 nights after Silas's funeral, thinking I was asleep. The key is to get her to sign the trust docs quickly, before she gets any independent ideas. Thorne says if we frame it as protecting her, she won't question it. Once I have co-trustee authority, I can start liquidating the non-essentials. The book collection alone is probably worth $100K. The whole estate could be converted to cash within a year. The recording ended. The only sound was the frantic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a clock that had belonged to Ryan's own grandfather. The irony was suffocating. Mr. Finch and Mr. Thorne began discreetly packing their briefcases. Their professional ethics, however flexible, did not extend to being accessories to demonstrable, premeditated fraud. "This is an illegal recording," Ryan shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "It's inadmissible." Beatrice smiled, a thin, dangerous expression. "Actually, Mr. Monroe, as you made the recording yourself on your own device, and my client discovered it on what is considered marital property, it's in a delightful legal gray area we could spend months and a significant portion of your future earnings debating in court. But that's not even our strongest piece." She reached into the binder and pulled out the last document, a notarized copy of Silas's letter to me. "My grandfather saw you, Ryan," I said, my voice thick with a grief that was no longer for him, but for the years I had lost his deception. I read the key passage aloud. "I have watched your husband, Ryan. I have seen the way his gaze sharpens. I fear he sees you as his most valuable acquisition." He was a confused old man. Ryan insisted, a last, desperate grasp for a defense. He was on medication. He didn't know what he was saying. Beatrice slid a final file across the table. "That's a common misconception. This is your grandfather-in-law's full medical record for the final year of his life, including 3 separate cognitive assessments. The last one, taken 2 weeks before he passed, concluded that he possessed exceptional clarity and reasoning skills. The doctor's notes specifically state, and I quote, 'Patient is fully competent to manage his own affairs and make complex legal and financial decisions.' It seems, Mr. Monroe, the only person in this scenario who was confused was you. You confused your wife's kindness for weakness. A costly mistake." The fight visibly drained out of him, leaving behind the hollow shell of a man caught in the full, unforgiving light of his own greed. His lawyers muttered their apologies and fled, leaving him alone in the center of the room, surrounded by the wreckage of his own making. "You're right about one thing," I said, gathering my binder and turning to leave. "This does change everything." As Beatrice and I walked out the door, leaving him standing there in the ruins of his family's living room, I didn't feel triumph. I felt a profound, aching sadness, and beneath it, the first, tentative stirrings of peace. I had not just defended my inheritance. I had reclaimed myself. The days that followed were filled with a quiet, purposeful dismantling. I moved out of the house Ryan and I had shared, a space that now felt like a sterile stage set, and into a small, sun-filled apartment above a flower shop. The scent of hyacinths and fresh-cut stems wafted up through the floorboards, a constant, fragrant reminder of new growth. My dog, a scruffy terrier mix named Scout, immediately claimed the sunniest spot on the rug, his presence a warm, uncomplicated comfort. I filed for divorce. The process was swift and clean. Armed with the evidence I had gathered, Ryan had no ground to stand on. He did not contest it. His share of our marital assets was minimal, and my inheritance, protected by the clear and legally sound will of my grandfather, remained untouchable. For weeks, I did nothing with the money. It sat in a trust account, managed by Beatrice, an abstract number on a screen. I needed to heal the part of myself that the money had exposed. I spent my days walking Scout along the banks of Willow Creek, volunteering at the botanical gardens, and rereading the books in my grandfather's collection. I was learning to listen to my own thoughts again, to distinguish my own voice from the one that had been whispering in my ear for 8 years, telling me what to want, what to think, what to value. One crisp autumn afternoon, I stood before the locked door of The Gilded Page. The paint was peeling and a fine layer of dust covered the windows, but the building itself was solid, its foundations deep. Using the old brass key Silas had left me, I stepped inside. The air was still and thick with the scent of paper and time. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light slanting through the grimy windows. I ran my hand along a bookshelf, my fingers tracing the titles my grandfather had so carefully curated. This place wasn't a depreciating asset. It was a sanctuary. It was a legacy. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, what I had to do. The renovation took 6 months and a significant portion of my inheritance. I didn't hire a big firm. I hired local craftspeople, a carpenter whose hands were as gnarled and wise as my grandfather's, a young female electrician just starting her own business, a team of painters who sang as they worked. We didn't just restore the bookstore. We transformed it. The front remained a cozy, curated bookshop, but the sprawling back rooms and the dusty upstairs apartment were reborn. We built classrooms and workshops, installing sturdy workbenches, bright lighting, and every tool imaginable. On the first anniversary of Silas's passing, we opened the doors to the Hearth and Anvil Center. The name came to me one night, a tribute to the warmth of a welcoming space and the strength of forging a new life. Our mission was simple: to provide free workshops for women in practical skills, basic carpentry, plumbing, electrical work, automotive repair, and, most importantly, financial literacy. Our first student was a woman named Sophia, a timid mother of 3 who had just left an emotionally abusive marriage. Her husband had always told her she was too helpless to survive on her own. I'll never forget the look on her face the first time she successfully wired a lamp, the sudden, brilliant flash of light mirroring the illumination in her own eyes. The center became a haven. It was a place where women who had been told they were weak discovered their strength. It was a place where women who had been told they were foolish learned to manage budgets and read contracts. They came to learn how to fix a leaky faucet and left with the knowledge that they could fix their own lives. They learned to trust their hands, their minds, and most importantly, their own instincts. Sometimes, when the center is quiet at the end of the day, I sit in my grandfather's old armchair in the corner of the bookshop, Scout snoozing at my feet. I look at the warm light spilling from the workshop, and I hear the echo of laughter and the hum of determined work. I am not living off my inheritance. I am living in it. I am cultivating it, just as Silas taught me, and the garden I am tending is bigger and more beautiful than I ever could have imagined. A few months ago, I received a letter from Ryan. It wasn't a demand or a threat, but a strange, rambling apology full of self-pity. He wrote that he had made mistakes, that he had been blinded by ambition, that he missed the life we had. He asked if there was any chance we could talk. I folded the letter and placed it in the wood stove that heats the center on cold nights. As I watched the paper curl and turn to ash, I felt no anger, only a distant pity. He still didn't understand. The life he missed wasn't real. It was a construct built on a faulty foundation. My life now, the one I had built with my own 2 hands, with the tools my grandfather had left me, this life was solid. It was true. And it was all mine.